Welcome to the LemnaTec Academy. In this video, we look at LemnaExperiment in more detail, starting with the experiments page. Here we are on the overview page again. We switch to the experiments page by pressing the experiments button on the left. Now we see the list of all experiments currently in our database. If you start fresh with your system, this list will be empty. However, if you have run some experiments and measurements with lambda control already, these experiments will appear here. In this list, we have one row for each experiment. In each row, you find the name of the experiment, the description of the experiment as you provided it, and as far as it fits into the column, the number of recordings made in this experiment, the date and time of the last recording in this experiment, and finally the number of analyses already executed using data from this experiment. As mentioned in the previous video, we have 5 buttons at the front of each experiment. First is the info button. The info button provides additional information on the experiment. That is, the description, the list of annotations, the size in terms of recordings, snapshots and vessels, and the storage capacity used. The storage capacity is calculated in background, one experiment by another. Therefore, if you start the program fresh, not all experiments will already display this information. Some experiments will display yet unknown. The next button is the Edit button. It opens the Edit dialog for this experiment. More to it in a second. The next button is the Duplicate button. It duplicates the experiment as far as management data goes. Again, more to it in a second. The fourth button is the Delete button. Since deleting an experiment is a sensitive operation, clicking here opens a dialog. In this dialog, you can choose to delete this experiment, to archive the experiment and delete it then, to only archive the experiment, or to cancel everything. The last button is the Archive button. It has essentially the same function as the Archive Only button in the Delete dialog, which we've seen just a moment ago. The archive of an experiment contains the following data: the content of the experiment's data folder and the content of the database related to the experiment and its snapshots. This includes the experiment's analysis results. Since LemnaExperiment 24.11, the archive includes also the analysis definitions itself and its related information. Older archives refer only to the analysis definitions by their ID. However, besides the obvious, archives are compatible between all versions of LemnaExperiment. But let's have a look at the Edit dialog. This is the Edit dialog. In this dialog, you have 2 or 3 elements where you can make changes: the description, the list of annotations, and, if this is a new experiment, the name of the experiment. All these elements are optional except for the name in case of a new experiment. We will deal with the annotation fields in a later video in class 5. Here only this much: annotations might be useful and important once you evaluate your analysis. In the description, you shall enter some text describing the experiment. This might be very helpful if you in a few years look on the experiment again and wonder what you have done back in the day. As mentioned before, if you run measurements with lambda control using yet unknown experiment names, these experiments will be created automatically in the database. However, since no more information is passed from lambda control, the experiment description and the annotation lists are empty. You can use this Add a dialog to add an experiment description as well as annotation fields as required. Back on the experiments list, you see a few buttons at the bottom. On the right, the Add New Experiments button. This leads to the same Add dialog as before, but this time the mandatory field to enter the experiment name is visible. On the left, we have the Import button, where you can import archived experiments. The Export button leads to the Import-Export page. We'll talk about this page in a later video. I hope you got an impression on the functions and capabilities of the Experiments page. The most important feature is that it provides an overview of the experiments currently stored in your database. But it offers more than that, as we just saw. In the next video, we will take a look at the probably most important page to many users, the recordings page. See you there.